So after this, Carrier cites one more passage from the Talmud to make his case. He says, the Talmud likewise has a dying and rising Christ, son of Joseph, ideology in it, even saying, quoting Zechariah 12:10, that this Messiah will be pierced to death. Carrier is referencing at this point Babylonian Talmud Sukkot 52a-b, and it appears in a footnote, and its citation of Zechariah 10 as proof that Christ, son of Joseph, would be pierced to death. Importantly, again, Carrier doesn't actually quote the tractate or deal with it. He's only summarizing what's happening here.
Which, I mean, I don't see why that's like a bad thing.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
You cite it. If people want to go and read it, they can read it.
Well,
like,
I mean, I would say like, well, okay, yes, and like, what is this follow up? What does he have to say after that?
Yeah. And I do, we'll let him play a little bit more. I do have a, crap. I thought that I had the, cause I did put together a 52a-b reference. I thought.
Yeah, I thought I saw one. Maybe not.
No, well, I'll find it, but I'll let him, okay, fall through with it.
At one point, Carrier goes on to claim, there is no plausible way later Jews would invent interpretations of their scripture that supported and vindicated Christians. But I think this is pretty spurious. Individual traditions can be loosely dated to specific rabbis, as I demonstrated with Tractate 98b, which we dated to, around the year 200 on the basis of the students of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. In this case, Rabbi Dosa lived around 50 CE. The Talmud Bavli is dated to about 500 CE. Carrier also includes another Jewish text called the Sefer Zerubbabel.
Yeah, that illustrates that he's slipping up here because he's confusing, again, the first extant mention of a thing. He's forgetting that these are traditions passed on through multiple generations. So he's somehow confusing the fact that a particular rabbi said a thing with the idea that that rabbi invented that thing. And unless the rabbi says they invented that thing, that isn't true. Like they're just passing on things that they were taught by people who passed on things that they were taught, et cetera, right? So, or possibly even from books. Like it's not necessarily, as I said before, it's not necessarily an oral transmission. But either way, we can't say what he's saying now. We can't say that because we have it from this rabbi, therefore it starts then. So that argument is bogus, that you can't get to his conclusion that way. So what I do is I make the point, like, these things don't reference Christianity. There's no way that Jews at this date would be inventing this stuff unless it was well established, right? It can't be that they just, these Christians have these neat ideas, let's borrow them all and vindicate every teaching that Christians are throwing at us. That's improbable. It's not impossible. I don't say it's impossible. I say it's improbable. And what he has in reverse is no evidence to make it probable again. He just says it's possible. But that doesn't rebut probable, right? Like, yeah, I agree it's possible. But what I'm saying is it's improbable, and here are the reasons. And he gives no response to this. He doesn't give any evidence that it would be probable that it was a late invention borrowed from Christians. Like that's a weird thing to say when there's no evidence of it coming from Christianity. His only argument seems to be chronology, but the chronology is not a valid argument because all we have are the extant mentions of this teaching, not the origin of the teaching. And that's a fundamental mistake in scholarly analysis of sources. And he used the correct terminology, or one of the versions of the correct terminology, about terminus ante quem and post quem. He used ad quo, but it's the same kind of thing, that you have a date where you have no later than this and no earlier than this. But that window is often huge, right? So if you say it's no later than this, you can't say no earlier than this. It's no earlier than this, right? So there's a huge range where that could come from. So the chronology argument doesn't create a probability argument. It only creates a possibility argument. So his modal logic is wrong. He's messed up the modal logic here. You need evidence that it was late, not merely the fact that the earliest citation is late. That's not enough. You need more evidence. And whereas I present evidence that it must go earlier, it's more probable that it goes earlier. I make more arguments than he represents here, but that's one of the arguments I make for this, but it's more probable that there was a common tradition to both Christians and Jews than that there was two separate traditions, or that the Jews borrowed things from the Christians without mentioning it or being bothered by this. And so it's all about probabilities. And so he doesn't respond to the probability argument. He only responds to the possibility argument, which is not what I made. So there's an issue with logic there. And I don't know that he would make that mistake normally. But I otherwise can't explain why he makes that mistake.
Right. As far as the I've got instead of Sukkah Sanhedrin, I mucked that up on the title.
Yeah.
But so it's the Sukkot 52a right there. Now the 52a and b kind of covers the entire idea behind this, but this is where the Zechariah 12:10 shows up. As you can see,
I see what you've done. Okay, yeah.
12:10 has
it's labeled for people in the audience, the Sanhedrin 52a. Forget that. Scratch that out. Right underneath that, you'll see to the left, you'll see the correct track.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
So and 12:10 says that he'll be pierced through, and then in the Sukkah there it says they shall mourn, or let's see, and they shall look unto me because they have thrust him through, which I'm guessing is what it's mentioning the whom they pierced in Zechariah 12:10. So, but the 52a to b Sukkah is laying out the entire ideology there, the Christ son of Joseph.
Yeah.
And now Kipp is we're about to get into the Sefer. I think he's about to mention the Sefer Zerubbabel.
Yeah, which is a medieval text. As I point out in on the historicity of Jesus, I'm not coy about it. I don't hide this fact, but yeah.
Along with the Talmud, as he puts it, evidence of a pre-Christian dying Messiah theme. And I find this utterly bizarre, since the Sefer Zerubbabel is even later than the Talmud, dating to about the 7th century. So I don't think that his claim about the implausibility of these traditions being later than Christianity hold any water. It's like an argument from incredulity. There's all sorts of ways that filtration back and forth between Christian messianic expectation and later Jewish messianic expectation could be conflated.
He's making an argument to possibility. I was making an argument to probability, and I gave specific reasons why it would be improbable for Jews to vindicate Christians in an era when they're super intensely interested in not doing that. So it's very unlikely that they would borrow this. It's not impossible. So he's saying it's possible. There's lots of ways. Yeah, absolutely. Lots of ways it could happen. But it's not probable. And that's the key point that you have to take away.
Well, also, if I remember correctly, in the Talmud, there's no mention of Christian, there's no reputation of Christians' claims for this, because the Christians are also claiming the same things.
There's no exactly. There's no. So we're talking. It's important to know that we're talking about the Babylonian Talmud, which was a Talmud written outside the Roman Empire. It's important to note that Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, we don't have complete. We only have fragments of it, and it doesn't have any clear references to Christianity. It might have done at some point, but we just don't have the complete version of it. The Babylonian, it would be neat to have that because we could learn some things. But the Babylonian Talmud was only aware of a version of Christianity in which Jesus lived and died 100 years earlier than the Gospels depict. And they're very explicit about this. They situate him in that particular period of history, the particular rabbis of that period he's interacting with, and so on. So they don't have any conception of a Jesus killed by Pilate or any of that stuff. So it looks like what they understand as Christianity in the Babylonian Talmud is some other version that is not the version that became popular in the Roman Empire. So that said, it's very clear from very early on, we look in Paul and so on, that the Christians were using Isaiah 52 and 53 as a really, beat you over the head source text proving their arguments. And that would probably have just been true in the Babylonian Christianity, even if they did a different chronology for their history of Jesus. But that's why it's interesting that at no point do the Talmudic rabbis say, the Christians are making all these claims about Isaiah 53, and don't buy that. Isaiah 53 is not about the Messiah. Everything they say is false. There's nothing like that. They never talk about it. They're completely oblivious to the idea that the Christians thought this, or at least they never mention it, right? It's not an issue. So it may have been an issue. It's just not mentioned in the text that we have. But we know it was going on. We know that was a major source text. That was like a key text for the Christians. Was that in Daniel 9? But here in the Babylonian Talmud, there's no consciousness that this has any connection to Christianity. They just quote Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah. Yeah, sure, why not? Like, there's no alarm, there's no like caution, there's no like, wait a minute, there's no. But the Christians say there's none of this. They just take it as rote. That's just, yeah, we all cite Isaiah 53. Like, who wouldn't? And so that suggests to me that it's pre-Christian. The only other explanation would be that they came up with it later by themselves without Christian influence. And this is another argument I make that Davis doesn't mention, is that the probability of two independent inventions of this is less than the probability of one invention having a causal effect in both directions. So it gets invented once, causes Christianity and causes rabbinical messianism, and then you have one event causing both things. That's way more probable than it being independently invented twice. But even if it's independently invented twice, this proves that it was easy to invent, which is my point. Is that there's no obstacle to the Jews thinking of a dying Messiah. They could easily just invent one on their own. They could easily just borrow one from Christians, according to Kipp Davis. They have no problem with it. And so that's the thing that's really crucial here, is that when I have the or logic, I mentioned earlier that there's a logic, it's an or statement. Either they did believe this or it was easy for them to believe it. Davis is confirming my point, is that he's claiming that the Jews would just readily borrow this idea of a dying Messiah from the Christians, have no problem with it, no issue. It's like, well, that proves my point. It was easy. There was no hostility to the idea. And so I think it's important that where Davis is ignoring all of my actual arguments and giving this kind of the wrong argument against what I said. He's giving a possibility argument rather than a probability argument. I gave a probability argument, but also I had the either or argument. He's ignoring that, right? So when you look at my actual argument, it's completely impervious to everything he's saying here. And that's, I think, the only way to learn that is to go to the text, my book, and read it. Then you'll know. You'll know what he's leaving out. You'll know how his arguments are impertinent and don't reply to what I actually argue. But you have to actually go read my book. And this is the problem with my critics generally, is that they misrepresent through dishonesty or error. And in this case, I think it's error. What it says, and there's only one way to find that out, is to go compare the text to what they're saying, and then you know how reliable or not they are as critics of the book.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we got just a little bit left here on this major section, and then we're gonna move to the conclusion. Is his conclusion for this first video.
This is not a problem, and more significantly, all the evidence that we have of this Jewish messianic expectation is post-Christian. There's a possibility that this tradition may predate Christianity, but this is also not clear.
Yeah, there's more evidence than that, but yeah. These specific passages he's talking about, but we have the wisdom of Solomon, we have the Melchizedek scroll, and so on. There's other stuff than this, and there's the fact that a lot of scholars think Daniel 9 is riffing already on Isaiah 52, 53, that Wisdom of Solomon is already riffing on 52, 53, etc. There's the use of Maccabees, the idea of atonement, the atonement idea that people can die, martyrs can die to atone for the sins of Israel. That's in Maccabees. That's a pre-Christian idea. That's not a new thing that the Christians invented. So there's all of this stuff. And you can learn all of this other evidence and all this convergent data points on the same point from all those other scholars that we cite. The list you brought up of the 10 scholars, and me and Lataster, we're just citing them. So forget Lataster and I. Go. You can go to the other scholars and see what they say. Same with Staples. Staples just says these guys prove it. You can go look at what he's talking about. And they give more evidence than I'm talking about. They give more evidence than Kipp's talking about. And the fact there's so many of us, so many scholars who are coming to this conclusion, it eliminates any objection that this is somehow beyond the pale, that there's no way to come to this conclusion. There's a lot of scholarly support for this.
Yeah, I notice a lot of pushback that I get is people just saying, oh, well, this interpretation of the suffering servant and all of these interpretations didn't occur until after Christianity started making their claims. And, I just feel like that argument is just ignorant of the scholarship that's out there.
Yeah, at the very least, it's not aware that scholarship exists, right? And I think it's not just that it's ignorant of what it says, it's ignorant that it exists. And that's important because the assumption that you run into is like, oh, you are just some rando who's making a stupid statement. It's like, no. This is a position in the field that has a lot of support by a lot of scholars. Yeah, it's debated. I pointed out in my own in the point on the historicity of Jesus. I say it's a debated point, but the support is way wider than I even indicate in my book. Like I found more. That list I've built is longer and larger than it was when I first published, and so. So you have to say, like, there's a lot of scholars who take this seriously. This isn't something we made up. This isn't some ridiculous, incompetent error. This is a position that is a respected position in the field.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we got a quick conclusion here from Kipp. Kipp says that he is going to be doing 2 more parts at least to reviewing Dr. Carey's book. I don't know if we'll do streams for each one of those. I guess it depends on how egregious they are, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, I know it's good. It's actually, I appreciate your having me on to talk about it because I think it's important for people to hear the other side. So it's not just like you're being siloed and just hearing one person's opinion. I think it's valuable to go through these things, but also not just to get the facts straight, but also to learn methodology because I think it's more important, not just that Kipp Davis made mistakes. It's more important to understand how he made them so that our audience can learn from that and not make those mistakes ourselves. So if you see like, how did the mistake happen? That's really valuable information. Probably more important than getting the facts correct is learning how that mistake happened. So you can correct your epistemology and be aware of that. And like, oh, am I doing this? Am I making that mistake or not? And that's how you get better at everything, basically. Anything scholarly, for sure.
Let me make a note. Read fucking footnotes. Got it. Yeah, KC said, how about read the book?
Read the book. Yeah, it's sad that I have to keep saying that, but yeah, that's true.
All right, so here's Kipp's conclusion about this particular section in element 5 and kind of 6. We didn't go over 6 because he really just kind of brushes it off.
That was it, right? That last mention, right, was the only. Right. Yeah, that's what I thought. Right, he says it bleeds in, but he doesn't go into it.
Right.
And it's interesting that he did that because I have issues with the way I've worded element 6. So like, I might even agree with some of his criticisms there. But that's besides the point. But anyway.
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, he says this part is even more ridiculous than the last or something like that. I mean, I feel
he thinks element 5 is the worst. That's why he focused on it, actually. But,
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, here's his conclusion about element 5 and 6 and everything. This is how he feels about it.
So what do we have here? We have Carrier suggesting that there's an early Jewish expectation for a death of their anticipated Messiah, and that this death would mark the imminent end of the world, and that this predates Christianity.
And I know that you have issues with the imminent death, but I didn't know if you want to say something now or just wait until the end.
I'm being charitable, so I like there's lots of things like, what does he mean by marks the end? That's not the word I used, etc. But I'm not going to quibble about that. People can go to look at my actual wording and avoid any of his misinterpretations that may be happening here. I don't know, because he doesn't elaborate. So,
and the evidence he has offered for this so far all come from the very late Babylonian Talmud. Even worse, the texts that he cited within the Babylonian Talmud don't provide anything remotely close to what he suggests that these texts actually mean.
Yeah, I also presented Daniel and Wisdom of Solomon and the Melchizedek scroll. So his idea that it's all the Talmud, that's a weird thing for him to say. I'm surprised he said that, especially since I would think he would be totally wanting to get into it with me on the Melchizedek scroll. and because that's very controversial and problematic, and I would expect him to have done it. Maybe he'll do the next video all on the Melchizedek scroll. I don't know.
I know that
he forgets that that's a thing. But anyway, that it's in there.
He does. Yeah, he does mention the wisdom of Solomon, and I think Melchizedek scroll. But he says that he's going to handle it. Like he teases that for the next.
Sure, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I would expect that because those are more controversial than the stuff he's talking. The stuff he's talking about today in this video, all his mistakes are in not getting correct what I said. When you get to the wisdom of Solomon and the Melchizedek scroll, there are actual points of dispute that we could have. That makes sense that his next video would be on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's it for Kipp's first video. And like I said, depending on how bad the next one is or how good the next one is, I guess we'll, have to see.
Yeah. Right. It could be great. Might change my mind on things. Who knows?
Yeah. If you're really excited to see Kipp's response, I think that he said that it's already available on Patreon. Like if you subscribe to his Patreon, you can watch the video. So if you're really interested in this kind of stuff, you can go on ahead and check him out over there. All in all, I felt that, I was not impressed with Kipp's video, and I think it's primarily because, like you said, he forgoes doing the normal thing of like reading footnotes and reading the entire context, but he's also just making up arguments where he doesn't need to make up arguments. And so that's where I was kind of a bit, I guess, taken back by the video and not all that impressed with it. It would be more impressive if he actually read the footnotes instead of like just glossing over it.